feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, we're back. David Fincher, he's here. He's ready to go. He's hanging out in WeWorks. He's eating McDonald's.
And he's saying Netflix has the best quality control of all. Love the guy, but David, that's some I just made a movie for you speak.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Big time.
But hey, they do have good quality control because this movie's kind of awesome, right?
Yes. The Killer. We
are reviewing David Fincher's The Killer, which is now streaming on Netflix. Both Eric and I did see the movies in a cinema, as a Netflix movie is usually not seen by most people. But it is playing here at TIFF Bell Lightbox in Toronto. I think it did get whether you can still find it in a cinema near you, I am not sure, because it did have a fairly, I think, like 1 or 2 week release. It might have been extended in certain places, but I'd suggest if you can see it in a theater, try to. I think a Fincher movie should always be seen in a theater if you can, unless it's Mank, then just let that stay on Netflix. Mank stinks, man.
Are you afraid of the Mank?
If you can see it in a theater, try to. I think the sound design in this movie is fucking incredible. And if you go to a cinema that has really, really good speakers like TIFF Bell Lightbox, or I don't know if it's playing in Dolby and Dolby Atmos and other places in the US, but the sound design specifically is something that stood out to me, especially seeing it in a cinema, which I think could be lost if you're just watching it at home on your TV speakers or your sound bar or something like that. I don't know. I haven't watched it at home yet, but Eric, how are you doing?
I'm good, Matt. I'm actually really excited to talk about The Killer because you saw it the morning I was flying out to Aruba, and then as soon as I got back, I had bought tickets at the Lightbox to go and see it, because I only thought that it was playing exclusively. The wording was a little bit misleading in terms of like what
exclusively
Tip was saying.
For a week, right?
Yeah, but it was playing at Landmark Cinemas in Whitby as well. So I think Landmark does have a deal with Netflix because they usually get their stuff a week or two before the film hits streaming. So watching it though at the Lightbox, actually with my brother Kyle, was great. And it was, as you're saying, the sound design and the immersive nature of how you hear sort of, the character insulate himself when he is, getting his game face on. We see this in the opening prologue is amazing, and it gives new definition to corporate espionage in a way, and you get what you pay for. But what I was taken back by the most is it's funny. It's actually weirdly a subversive satire, and almost, and I said this in my Rogers review, that it's basically a comical character assassination. And what it's pointing and taking aim at is both the idea of what a hitman is, especially because you're only seeing it from the perspective of this character played by Michael Fassbender, who gives a cool, calm, and collected performance, mostly done in voiceover narrative. But it's also making fun of David Fincher's filmography in a way, and also the kind of
process.
The methodical nature of how he is exacting to the point of, being a tyrant on set, that he shoots 50 takes to just get
the plan.
the way that this killer talks almost sounds like a director talking to an actor. Stick to the plan, don't improvise, don't show any empathy, and he's basically forcing this down.
Take the shot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We got to get the shot. Make sure that you're on point. Lower your heart rate. Make sure that everything is good to go. Like it's all there.
Point
and
the
then
camera, a gun in the right direction.
Yeah.
I agree.
And then there's even a little bit of Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Samurai as well, which is this classic post noir, neo-noir film with Alain Delon in the lead role. And you kind of see, like, again,
Say
it's
3 times fast.
Alain Delon in the lead role, Alain Delon in the lead role,
You
Alain
nailed it. You
Delon
nailed it.
in the
You're
lead
really
role.
good. You're really good.
But yes, but I'm becoming the killer now. But what I was fascinated by was that sense of humor, and I think a big part of
Very
that
funny, actually. Yeah.
is how Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote the script, who also wrote Seven and did uncredited rewrites on Fight Club and The Game, incorporates aspects of the genre that you're familiar with, but then plays them up in a kind of almost mundane kind of way. And then we'll talk about this even more, how corporate aspects of this storyline
Product
are
placement
integrated.
and
Yes, and how it's very unflattering to things like WeWork and Amazon and Google Maps and, you know, everything in between. And it just feels
McDonald's.
like it really is this weird takedown of all these things, even though it's also been
Which,
made
I mean,
by
he did
one
a
of
little
these
bit.
things.
He did a little bit in Fight Club too, very on the nose, right?
But Fight Club's the more, and that's an interesting thing as well, because like that will be the sort of the main comparison within his filmography, because when Fight Club was made, it was very angsty and teenage-esque in its sort of perspective on things,
of
like
capitalism
you see,
and
like Edward Norton talking about filling his place with IKEA furniture, and you see, like, you know, his room basically shift into an IKEA photo
showroom. Yeah.
And then, you know, the voiceover narration of Edward Norton's character then slowly progressing as, I guess, what you would consider by this standard day and age an incel. That kind of narrative plays out. But the character I was really feeling like a certain comparison to with the killer is Patrick Bateman. The way that Patrick Bateman
I
in
thought the
American
same thing, actually,
Psycho talks about his routine, but then also says, I'm this killer. I'm good at what I do. I can get rid of bodies. Fuck Paul Allen. Also Jared Leto in both Fight Club and American Psycho. But then you start to realize this guy's a bit of a knob.
Yeah.
And
a
so is
bit
Michael
of a phony.
Fassbender's
Killer,
his
because bucket hat, just thinking that he's blending in, but like, maybe this is you, bro. No, I agree with you. It's very, very funny, which goes back to my seeing it in a theater as well, not only for the sound design, but it is more of a dark comedy than you're expecting. And I think feeding off the energy of a crowd that's not expecting that, I think, is a lot of fun. I was surprised and taken aback with how funny it was. I think it's I think as brutal and funny as its lead character is something that I said right after the movie, where the movie is still vicious. It's violent. It's brutal. It takes no prisoners at times. But all of that kind of leads to the dark humor. Like you mentioned, the product placement in the movie. And just seeing, like, again, how mundane an assassin's life could be, and how they would go about doing that and having that career in our time period right now, with the apps that are available, with the tracking, with the products, and like you said, Amazon ordering things, and like it really is interesting to both see that and kind of take some of the, whatever Fincher's trying to say with utilizing all of that product placement throughout the whole movie, starting off with McDonald's, of him eating an Egg McMuffin, but only eating the bottom bun to get more protein and less carbs and like things like that. And I'm sitting there and I'm eating a sausage McMuffin because I saw it at 10 in the morning as I'm watching this movie. And how he uses Amazon and all the card services. And like, just from the standpoint of not necessarily looking at what Fincher's trying to say with that, but more so just seeing how an assassin would operate today, I thought was really interesting, of like using a different airline each time, but then also collecting airline miles, which I thought was very funny. And then like,
but only taking coach, right? Like he never goes into first class. Like he never pampers himself. And he even says
he goes to the lounge, though. He does go to the lounge and relax.
But he does say, like in his narration, that in this day and age, in a technological world and social media, you can't disappear. You can't, fall off the grid.
So you just kind of have to
blend
in, right?
You have to be boring.
Yeah.
you have to assume an
That's why
identity
he's
that is so
trying to
plain
be
that
like a German tourist that just
yeah,
eats McDonald's. And he said there's so many of them, right? You can blend in there. He's like, it's the cheapest, easiest way to get 11 grams of protein or whatever he says, or 20 grams of protein. And he's just like, you don't stand out when you go to a McDonald's because there's so many people there. But you will be noticed, but you just be noticed as a tourist. And I thought all that stuff was really interesting of like, okay, how would an assassin operate today? And that stuff I found kind of, even though he's kind of a fuck up throughout the whole thing, and whether it's just he's starting to fuck up or he's always been like that, it's funny either way. But I think there's a really great fight sequence with the Florida man. I
the
think
Floridian.
that I think is awesome and brutal in that house. And like I said, there's some surprising kind of elements, and Reznor and Ross's score I think is quite good. Obviously, I will say the opening credits, I'm usually a fan of Fincher's credits, and I think that as a guy who's such a perfectionist who puts his, he needs to approve every single aspect of a movie. And opening credits, I think most filmmakers would still have, that's part of their film. But we talked about him being like the Blu-ray packaging and the trailers are all him and stuff like that. Where I would say this is such a weird thing to complain about, but I thought the opening credits in the movie were terrible, and it just weirdly started me off in like the wrong mindset, but then quickly won me over right away. They're really fast, and he did this in Gone Girl as well, where I thought the movie was accidentally playing in like fast motion when I first saw Gone Girl, because the opening credits kind of like fade in and out like really, really quickly in Gone Girl. And he kind of does the same thing here. But I just think it's really ugly looking, like the title treatment, and like it
Yeah.
looks really cheap. Like it looks like a VOD kind of movie. And
But maybe
that's
that's
like,
part of the point.
yeah, maybe. But
I mean, he's not a guy that like simply lets anything go. Like he's someone that understands each department that he's working with in terms of that collaboration process. So there's always a reason behind it. I'm not saying that like your criticism of it, I didn't like it either, but I think there is an intention behind
yeah,
how it's kind of sped up, as though like you're watching, when you watch something on Netflix or on a streaming service and sometimes you just kind of want to like skip the credits. It's
he's
almost
almost
like
like,
it's
you can't even
doing that.
fucking do it, man.
Yeah,
It's like,
because I beat you to the point, or the punch. And that's kind of what it feels like a little bit in that way, where it's like, okay, I know you don't want to, nobody cares about this stuff anymore. Like the way that he indulged with it in
his
Panic
dragon
Room, or
tattoo and
when he was doing almost like a parody version of Bond, with Daniel Craig, where like you see those credits open like a Bond opening. So with this, it's almost like, okay, nobody has time anymore, so let's just speed through this and like come up with the
I'm not
most
even gonna let Netflix put
exaggerated.
up the skip credits thing, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
and the sitcom aspect of it all, because
yeah.
the aliases that he goes by in the film are all sitcom characters, whether it be Felix Unger from The Odd Couple, or
You don't think
Archie
anyone would have caught
Bunker.
on or been like, you have the same name as?
Oh, I'm sure they would be, but maybe in this day and age where we're so detached from each
Yeah,
other and we don't care, like Sam Malone and Cheers, it's almost like, oh, it's obvious, but it's a generational thing too, because the character also listens a lot to the Smiths. There's only one other song that I recognize, which is Portshead, when he goes back to his villa in the Dominican Republic. But he listens to the Smiths, and one song in particular, How Soon Is Now from Meet His Murder, is when he's kind of telling us at the beginning in that opening prologue in Paris through the WeWork, how he operates, and that kind of moment of him assessing the building across the street. And when you're hearing the music in his ears, and then it cuts to that
that's
match.
the sound design is great. That's when I first was like, oh shit, that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
because it plays it perfectly. It's like, okay, this is how you would hear it outside of his head and then inside. And the way that we watch people watching, like Fincher has always been interest in observing the perverse nature of people. And so there's that voyeuristic quality of how he doesn't have his own life, but he involves himself in other lives. And then, the greatest action set piece in this movie is the acting between Fassbender and Tilda Swinton in a scene
Yeah,
that's
that
very
whole
similar
sequence is
to
awesome.
um, Viggo Mortensen and William Hurt in A History of Violence. Both A History of Violence and The Killer are graphic novel adaptations written by screenwriters that are very much sort of formulating the story around the filmmaker that has a distinct style, whether it be Cronenberg or Fincher. And so that moment in particular, when you get to it, it's just this great scene of you're seeing these two formidable actors going back and forth and having this conversation, and Tilda Swinton, is doing much of the talking because Fassbender is sparse and reserved and only kind of says a couple of words here and there, but the way that he'll talk, like even when he says thank you, it's kind of funny, or mentions a certain word or has a sentence. There's humor to it, but again, going back to the Fincher aspect of it, of Fincher being in control, complete control in his head. He's always talked about, like, the movies he makes, he's always disappointed by because they never turn out the way that he thought they would be, even though a lot of his movies are good and they're great. But the way that you have things mapped out in your mind, you never completely have it all figured out because there's always a miscalculation. And when you see Charles Parnell's character in one sequence when he's in New Orleans, that is showing that you can't calculate how somebody reacts to something because it's their own
You think in your
body.
head it's going to work one way, but
it sometimes doesn't, and then you lose control, and then you have to pivot. And it throws everything off balance in a way. And so, like, those are the things that I think
but it ends up
very
working
smart
out in the end, which I think is an interesting metaphor. I'm totally with you on all of that. I think the movie is just fully and wholly entertaining from start to finish. I think it is, probably, when you think of the Fincher's filmography, probably will land maybe not something that's going to be as memorable as some of his huge heavy hitters, but like I still think from start to finish, just like a entirely engaging and fun watch. Weirdly, like it's just like an entertaining movie.
He's one of those few guys that can make something so depressing or nihilistic
but be
entertaining and rewatchable, because Seven is one of those films that is such a downer, but I can throw that on anytime and kind of enjoy it, where, like, say, like something like Requiem for a Dream, one and done. I never want to watch that thing again. Where with this as well, it's like it's nihilistic, it has an existential quality of like what it's
weirdly an easy watch.
And it's very entertaining. And what does that say about us as consumers in this day and age? And I think that's a part of the point it's making as well, about how we consume things, or what we're consuming and what we're looking for, and how we're almost desensitized to certain aspects of this, the way that the killer is, and sort of how nonchalant he can be about it, and how he's kind of has this down to a formula, and the formula of one of these movies, and how you expect things to play out.
Anything else you wanted to touch on from the movie? We can pretty much go full spoilers. Like it's out on Netflix, so I mean we haven't really spoiled anything yet. So if you haven't seen the movie, please stop now and go watch it. Either just pop it on Netflix because it definitely is worth it, or if it's playing in a theater, please do. I think the cinematography was great. We already talked about Reznor and Ross's score. You mentioned Charles Parnell. That sequence is great as well. Like I liked the chapter-based storytelling in that it again, don't love the title treatments or how it was like shown to us. Everything had like this artifice to it, or this like it just didn't, I don't know. Like
but
usually
it looks,
I like
but
that
it looks
kind of
like,
shit, but like
it kind of looks like an airport text,
it's
right?
Yes.
And it's very, again, it's also very sitcom-y. It's like this week on The Killer, he's in
and I agree with that. So
and,
I'm sure maybe that's kind of the point, but like I liked all that of being like, well, he's traveling from here to here. This is where he is now. This takes place in Chicago. This takes place XYZ, blah, 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 Florida. And it for a globe-trotting movie, like I think that totally works in the chapter base. And each one is like this, this sort of revenge, but sort of cleaning up your own mess.
But I think he also likes it, like, because there's a part of him that wants the excuse to do this. And it's given him the excuse, because even though he's not necessarily the greatest assassin ever, according to his own voiceover, and we see him fumble, which you could almost look at like it's a midlife crisis kind of thing, like weirdly like premature ejaculation, where like the person that he once was, he's not
Now he needs to
anymore.
prove to himself that he can clean this shit up and then
Exactly. But
retire
also
after.
maybe he's happy to do it
Yeah.
because it's like, well, now I don't have these connections anymore that I have to worry about.
Exactly.
Because
Like
how much
him
longer
getting
do I
rid of
have?
Parnell and
Yeah,
cleaning
like,
up all this.
how much longer do I have? But then there's that interesting aspect with the scene with Arliss Howard's character, who's like this like tech mogul kind of guy, and
Right, yeah.
he's kind of brought into the situation, and he doesn't kill him, he just kind of threatens him. And I think it's just partly because he's too big of a personality within the real world that it would expose the killer, who never has a real name, just, you know, the aliases he goes by. And so there's a part of it where it's like he's being smart with that, where it's like, I don't want to bring any more heat down on me than I already have. And once he has that conversation with Arliss Howard's character, he takes that Rolodex card that he had and he throws it on the street, and the street sweeper comes and cleans it up, and it says clean sweep on the sweeper, which basically is like mission accomplished. You know, the game is over, you know, you're done. And like those little clever details are what make the intricacies of what Fincher's doing and his relationship with Andrew Kevin Walker. It's not in any way whatsoever emotionally satisfying, or like it doesn't really have like any meat on the bone, but that's the point of it. Like it's just stripped down to its bare essentials, and you feel like this is, some people are calling it a minor Fincher movie. I think it's kind of a bigger film than that. Like it's his best version of a Friday night flick.
And that's what I mean. I don't mean any slight when I say maybe it's not up there with the Social Networks and the Sevens, and even for me, Gone Girl and stuff like that. But by no means I think it's a minor work. Like I'll take 100 million of these that are just, like you said, Friday night. I think that's maybe why it's sort of perfect for Netflix too, right? Like I think it is better seen in a cinema. But I also think it's just like a weirdly easy watch that you could throw on a Friday, Saturday night, and it's fully entertaining. It's funny. It's engaging. It's thrilling. It's brutal. Like it's got everything you want in kind of like a weird, like it's sort of a popcorn movie, like and that's what it is, based on a graphic novel, right? Like it's a comic book movie, really, when you think of it. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think that makes it a minor work, right? Like I don't, just because it maybe, to your point, doesn't have a ton of depth or maybe nuance or meaning or anything like that. Like I don't know if you need that. Like it's what we talked about, again, another comic book movie, The Marvels. I think this is much better than The Marvels, but like sometimes it can just be that, right? And that doesn't mean that it's not, you don't have to compare it to, in the Marvel sense, Endgame or No Way Home, or you know, another comic book, Spider-Verse or something like that. It can just be like a fun popcorn movie. And I think this is like a Fincher version of that, right? Like, yes, it doesn't necessarily need to be, it's more in the line of like Panic Room, but I think it's better than Panic Room, right?
Yeah.
Where,
and he talked
again,
about Panic Room being like the reason why he made it. He designed it as a film that you go and see with your friends on a weekend. It's not supposed to be an awards movie. It's not supposed to be intense. It's supposed to be like enjoyable, entertaining. And he is dissecting the hitman movie, because that subgenre or genre is so cliched, because it's always the same. It's always somebody who's having an existential crisis or a redemptive arc and is an anti-hero.
we just saw that Michael Keaton one at TIFF.
Yeah, Knox goes away, or even with, you know, Richard Linklater's Hitman. There's so many of these movies where like it's like, okay, well, we get the same story again and again and again, and this is doing that, but it's removing any of the emotion, or as he says, the empathy from it, and he's just creating a streamlined streaming movie that plays well to the audience and moves at a pace that feels like as soon as you get in that mindset of the character, you're on your way. I think the only thing that works against the film is that Michael Fassbender is such a cool actor, is that the
You
character
don't think he
himself.
would blend in, or what?
Well, that's part of it, but I think the performance and him being Michael Fassbender, he's still cool, and I think part of the point of this story is to tell you that this guy is not as cool as he says he is. He's kind of one note, and he's kind of a joke, and look how much of a fuck up he is as he moves along. Where
even that fight sequence I said with the Florida man, not an assassin style fight sequence.
No,
the
and
only
even
person
when he
kills
drugs the dog too, right? Like how much to drug the dog. And but when you have those scenes, they show you like, this is how I have to do it, and then how it actually happens.
The poor
it's like,
secretary is the only one he
Dolores,
actually seems
man.
like the only one where he seems like an expert assassin, because it's a poor
Yeah.
woman who's unsuspecting of it, right? And then,
But I still think he's cool because it's Michael Fassbender. But the point of the movie is like, this guy's not cool at all. He's kind of a joke in a way, and he's just kind of a typical middle of the road hitman. You get what you pay for, and that's what everybody paid for with this. And it's a mediocre dude.
I mean, he did pretty well for himself in the Dominican and stuff like that.
Sure, but a lot of generic white dudes,
sure, that could be the point,
get
too,
on
right?
top and they do well
Failing
for themselves.
upwards.
They fail, and that's kind of what it is. Like, this is the hitman is the killer is the Ron Howard of hitmen,
even the tech billionaire guy or the tech guy getting away with it, right? Kind of,
Yeah.
he was the one wanting to assassinate this guy, and it didn't work out, and he was naive to them going, well, do you want us to clean it up? And he didn't ask any questions, and he was like, yeah, sure. Like, even Fassbender letting him, or the titular killer letting him off, is kind of fitting, right? Like this white dude who's rich, who basically was the reason for all of this. And Fassbender is the only person he lets go, is that guy, right? And then I think that's even something. So yeah, the movie rules. Like, it's fucking awesome. Go see it or go watch it on Netflix. I'm gonna give the movie a 4.5. I think it's fantastic. It's one of my favorite films of the year. I'll take 100 Fincher movies like this over something like Mank that is trying a little too hard for me to be something more than it is. But Mank, just not for me. But like, I think this Fincher is just so good at that fine line of either going the route of something that's bigger or more important, or unsuspecting. But like this with Gone Girl, even I think I would put this more in line with Dragon Tattoo and Panic Room, of just being stuff that is meant to be more just enjoyable than anything else. And I think he fully succeeds at that. And I will gladly rewatch this movie again on Netflix, and I hope it gets a Criterion release, because I would like to own it on like a good 4K version of it on disc,
like The Game. Which is another one that kind of fits with, like, it's in the structure of entertainment first than anything else. I gave it a 4 on Letterboxd, but talking about it, like, I'm going to bump it up to a 4.5, because it is just pure entertainment. And when David Fincher's in his wheelhouse with this kind of movie, he does it so well. He can do it in his sleep, basically. And you mentioned, like, the pulpy nature of Gone Girl and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and this and Panic Room. Like, they're all movies that kind of just play within that, whether it's about a serial killer or a misanthrope or just something that is like, okay, it's doom and gloom and despair, but he does it in such a way that is so watchable. And that is hard to do, because like a lot of these movies can be suffocating in terms of, it's like by the time you get to the end of them, you never want to watch it again. And that doesn't mean that the movie's bad. It's just like, okay, well, it's a one-time watch.
So intense, or so exhausting in a good way, that sometimes you don't want to go back to it. And
but this is those things, but it does it in a way that's so satisfying, that's so rare in this day and age of filmmaking, that you're almost excited to rewatch it. Like, it was one of those films, and we'll talk about Poor Things as well, where I could have watched it again right after it was finished. It was that much fun, and I'm sure you'll get even more out of it, just in terms of like the choices he makes. But as just looking at it as pure entertainment, it's amazing.
I agree. Thank you all for listening or watching. We really do appreciate it. You can check out all of our other reviews that we have up right now for things like Priscilla and The Marvels. And as Eric mentioned, we will have a review for Poor Things and Saltburn and The Curse. So a lot of Emma Stone, a lot of Jacob Elordi, a lot of awards movies coming up. The good thing about TIFF, you can check out all of our TIFF stuff as well as our TIFF recap on the last episode of the Untitled Movie Podcast, is we have a lot of movies that we didn't see at TIFF, so we have a lot to catch up with in November and December, which is kind of exciting. So a lot of these movies, that double feature we did of Poor Things and Saltburn last week was very exciting. Seeing something like The Killer coming was fantastic and something to look forward to. So we should have a lot of stuff over the next couple months, as Eric and I are cramming for Critics' Choice voting, which is early December. So our next 3 or 4 weeks will probably be filled with all the movies that didn't play TIFF. So it's gonna be a good time. So one-stop shop for everything. Head over to Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies, and you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And you can follow me on all the social medias at EM6211, and my video reviews are on rogerstv.com/cinemascene.
Until next time.
What do you think the killer would order at Taco Bell?
Oh God, he'd want to get rid of some of the carbs, right? Because you could load up with protein because you get all the beef in a taco. Would he be a soft shell or a hard shell guy? Or would he go with something like a crunch wrap? Or
I think he's a soft boy.
Or you think? Yeah, he is a soft boy, right? He'd go soft taco, probably just scoop the meat out with a fork or something, and not eat the tortilla or eat half the tortilla. Stick to the plan.
And then take the hugest dump in the lounge.
Bye, everyone. How many miles do you think he does have? Someone's got it. Someone on these things is going, wait a minute. You have so many miles on all these different programs and all these cars you rent. Someone's figuring this shit out. All right, bye, everyone.